Yikonef Moirecho, and your teacher will no longer conceal himself. Adam, you have it? Pasuk in Yeshaya. I'm just wondering, it's not, I don't think it's in the ha'tשכ. Maybe it's the ha'tשכ of Shabbos Chol Moed. I don't think so. Someone has a siddur? Right over there. Mevayachak Admo Adzoke, and the Alter Rebbe explains my Moirecho Bakzorim in the short Maimarim. This, what's coming now, this first paragraph is partially a quote from the Alter Rebbe. Shalavusim, it's there. Shalavusim Chasim okay, sorry. Ala Pnimiyim. That the nature of garments is that they cover that which is pnimius. The nature of a lavush is such that you can't distinguish between good and bad. Or maybe based Mishalim Medova, it's not exactly the Alter Rebbe's lashon, but it's so the Alter Rebbe brings two Mishalim to explain this Indian how garments conceal. Ha'alev, the first mashal, kama ish shoite, a fool. B'diburim shel chachma, he speaks words of wisdom. Sheyikabel michacha, that he get. I don't have a copy. You have your phone? I just sent it to your phone. Don't say this. Tomorrow I'll make copies. That he received from the chacham. So you're listening to this fool speak. It appears to everybody, they don't know him before, that he's very wise. But it's not his words, he's a shaitan. That's the first mashal of how levushim conceal. V'abeis, mimaisa hatev la'odam ra be'etzem. A good deed done by a person who's essentially bad. People will think he's a nice fellow. So that's how we see how garments conceal. Interestingly, the word beged, which is another word for garment, livgod means to be treacherous, to act treacherously, because that's the nature of a garment. You can put on a garment, and it conveys an appearance of something entirely other than you are. You put on the uniform, you said the words, but it's a betrayal of you. So, Mevayir, the Alter Rebbe then says, Ki koyach nimshach belavushe machshava diburu ma'aseh, because it's not simply a mask, but there's a koyach that is drawn into the garments, which l'chayra are very external expressions of the nefesh. Again, the way is the paradox. The lowest level is rooted in a very deep place. So there's a koyach in the levushim, the yapis is apnimis, to beautify the inside when it needs beautifying. Like someone very ugly. Shalavushim noyim, if he wears nice garments, Yafu mamash, it makes him presentable, makes him beautiful, makes it. Umamshich, the Alter Rebbe continues. He said, this is a famous quote. Maybe that's what you're referring to. The next quote is quoted frequently in Chassidus. Meichan koyach zeh belevushim. So where do garments have such an ability to literally? It's not to fool. No, he wants this. No, it's not that. He's saying like this, it's not the pshat that you put the garment on and the person behind them is eclipsed and you're seeing the garment. It's the person that's become beautified. He's speaking. This ugly person's walking around in these beautiful clothes. So, the explanation for that is not simply, well, that's, why not? Dress up nicely. So this is insisting that it's more than that. The person has become somehow affected. So that's he's asking, where does this come from? So this could be Sefer Movish She'orim. So it's brought down in the Sefer Movish She'orim, which means introduction to the gates, literally. It's written by Rabbi Chaim Vital. And it's an introduction to his other Svarim, the She'orim, the various gates that he talks about. So there he says, Inyan Amuk. Period. Chaim Vital says that this ability that the levushim actually affect the pnimius, dress up the pnimius, is a very deep thing, and leaves it at that. or Messiah. And the Alter Rebbe concludes, however, our pasuk is saying something else. Yikonef. So that's the mile of levushim. That's the avoid in golus. Is to beautify the inner corruptiveness, ugliness. But this is a nevuah that Yikonef oid merecha, no longer will your master, your teacher, be veiled. But meaning that Havaya Elikim, meaning V'layastiru halavushim debiyah. Elikus will be revealed, and the levushim debiyah will no longer concealed. V'chein Moirecho. I shouldn't see the whole pasuk. Maybe there's a reference to Havaya Elikim in this pasuk, not quoted. At any rate, it seems so. So that'll be Bizgalus, and likewise Moirecho. What's Moirecho? Hamidus u'Moiche in the Knesset Yisrael. So Yidden, Moirecho, your teacher, that refers to the emotions and the Moichin of Yidden. Lo yisyafu b'levushim, will not need to be beautified with garments. And the brudim, they'll be clear, beautiful, k'moshu be'emes, as they truly are. Vidal, which stands for Vidai Lemevin. This is enough for the discerning. These few words. Ad kam l'shoinoi. This is the teichen of the Alter Rebbe's Maimon. Now the Rebbe will explain. Huh?
Maybe by a person's opinion, I can understand it. If the guy's ugly, you're not changing him. You're faking out. You're putting makeup on. But the guy's opinion could be talking. You're bringing it out. But
first, it doesn't mean. But again, no.
He's ugly. It's not changing. Not bringing out the opinions.
But as I said before, this person now in totality, you're dealing with him, and you're not looking at an ugly person anymore. It's not like he's a picture and he's gone somewhere. Look at the picture. He's working, he's expressing himself through these garments. So in totality, there's this. That's what we're saying. It's not pshat like the b'chitzonis advarim. The pnimius advarim is that the garments do affect him b'pnimius. Let's learn. So first of all, what's the reason Alter Rebbe brings two mishalim? A fool who speaks wise words, and the second one, me'ishra, a bad person, and in brackets he has achzori, a cruel person. I think he wants to say that doesn't mean he's not mekayim Torah mitzvahs. A nice guy doesn't Torah mitzvahs. He means actually not a nice person, a cruel person. But not a question of from, not from, just a character trait. So his cruel person does an act of kindness. Why to Mishalim? We get the point. Because at the end he said in the Nimshal that Moirecho, your teacher, al Moichin u'Midas, that the Moichin of Yidden will be revealed beautifully as they are, and the Midas. So therefore, these two appropriate Mishalim. Behesem Zemevi Beis Mishalim. Therefore, he brings the two Mishalim. One, Minyan HaMoichin, of intelligence. That's the fool. Hadibur b'divrei Chachma, that speaks words of Chachma. And then he brought a mashal from behavior, emotions, Minyan HaMidas, Asiyas Ma'aseh Chesed, a kind act done by a cruel person. Now, that was a diuk to explain why we need two Mishalim. Now, the beer. The general inyan is the achshav, even though the avodah now, before Mashiach comes, when the world is unrefined, still, it's very difficult to actually change our emotions. Like he explains in Tanya, the Benyan cannot affect the transformation of his feelings. And certainly to transform the intelligence, that the mind is only an expression of Torah and Elikus. It's much more difficult, in fact, to change attitudes and perceptions than to change the emotions. It's even more difficult. It's deeper hardwired to who we are. It's our minds. Okay, so that's taka very hard now. Okay, do a taka that's known she'ikir bira moichin yilasid lavai. The transformation of moichin will taka be lasid lavai. Shedafka ziyah kirbush gimel arotz is keiniv knis v'kadmoni. Yeshua only conquered the seven nations, but keini knis Amin Moav and Midian will only be conquered when Mashiach comes, because they correspond to Seichel, Chabad Chacham Bin and Das. And that bitter is only Lasid Lavai. That's why Chassidus is revealed, Erev Geula, to begin that process of cleansing and purifying even the Moirecho. At any rate, so it's not very hard. He concedes to change the way we feel, to change perceptions and the attitude and the way the mind naturally responds. But therefore, what's the main avodah tzaka in the levushim? Thought, speech, and action. And here's the chiddush, that working in the levushim, they will affect a general yofi, a cleansing, a beauty in his whole metzius. It's not that he's only behaving externally. His whole connection to the Eibush is only in the levushim alone. They affect his pnimius. To explain this a little bit further, on the simple level, the inference is the whole change is only external. In the eyes of the viewers. Nonetheless, we see from the Alter Rebbe in explaining the mile of the Koich HaLavushim, he brings there from the Movei She'orim, and he says, Sheyesh B'zeh Inyan Omuk. It's very deep. Now, if it's just simply a facade, it's not very deep. He's still the shaita, and the person's still ugly. There's been no change. But we see from the Alter Rebbe that there is. Moving. That even though the Chitzonis is only acting externally, but it can change his very being. In these two mashalim, if you continuously, the shaita, not just once, but you continuously, I'm not saying what I think, he is only going to quote divrei chachma. Even if right now, I guess as he embarks on this process, he remains the fool, godel, and a big fool. If he speaks divrei chachma, how does it pearl shesof kol sof yeh chacham gadol? In the end, Moirecho, he'll become a chacham gadol. That's the power, and he's not a parrot. He becomes a chacham gadol. The reason is explained elsewhere. This is because the levushim are rooted in the etzem nefesh, and if you're drawing on the etzem nefesh, so you're drawing on the very essential place within the nefesh, and it seeps through consciousness of seichel and midas, affecting to some degree a change. Perek Dalet and Tanya, that the levushim on the one hand external, but levushim of the nefesh are the way the neshama connects to the Eibishter by carrying out Torah mitzvahs. But elsewhere it's explained that the levushim, oisius, and the hamaisa, they're really rooted in the most essential level of the soul. One of the explanations is that it's through speech and action, and to some degree machshava, to be connected to somebody else. Now that ability to connect to somebody else is a self-transcendent. The self is locked into self. How do I affect somebody else? And I cannot give you my feelings and my understanding. That's the real me. What I can give you is words and action. But in those words and action, it conveys what's going on inside. What I'm saying is that this ability to be able to connect to somebody else is rooted in the etzem nefesh, which is not bound to self, and it can connect to otherness, to another person. To truly connect to somebody else draws on the deepest, essential, godly part of the nefesh. Huh?
But it's still a vehicle for that.
What's still a vehicle?
The levushim. I mean, what is being conveyed and connected is not the levushim.
It's the vehicle to explain the pnimius.
Yeah.
True. But I'm saying it's more than just a vehicle. I'm saying that the levushim are rooted in the etzem nefesh, and therefore that's the source of the ability to be able to share oneself with somebody else.
the end, is it changing you, or really the pneumius you are good, it's just bringing out your pneumius, or is it changing you?
Okay, so there,
What is it doing?
both. Because since the levushim are rooted in the etzem mamash, and the etzem is you are good, you're only a miserable person in your mind and your heart, but the pneumius, you're a decent, good fella. So the levushim take a draw on that etzem. That's the in Omak Ma'id.
It's bringing it out.
Yeah. So all of this, yeah, there is a and likewise a cruel person. If he is going to decide to do acts of kindness, he said it before too. He said that the shaitan becomes a chacham. This is the great virtue of the levushim, and he doesn't say it because they're rooted in the etzem nefesh, which is pure and can affect changes even in the wiring. The etzem is not limited to the wiring and can change it. Can change the pneumius. This is also the story. Interesting, the mind to tell a story. It happens sometimes. By the Alter Rebbe, so they snagged him tained al varan hogas achsidim, that achsidim they conduct shmarichim betfila, they daven bariches, mahadim b'mitzvahs, and they all of this piety. She'oisim zois b'chitzenis b'vad. They don't hold by it. He's compelling himself to sit there and daven and kvetch out the words and force himself to think. It's not coming from a natural, spontaneous place of dveikos and ecstasy. And likewise, the hidur mitzvah is holding by the hidur. He does it because it's minig Chabad. He does it. They don't hold by it. So that was his taina. The taina of the misnagdim. It's a deep taina. The whole point of this is pneumius. They are not pneumius. They should do what they're holding by, which isn't much. So he said no. But there's no chiyuv to be ma'arich and tefillah and yidden b'makay mitzvahs without these doing for thousands of years, and it's all fine and good. You don't have to become and make new meises and geschäften, fancy footwork when you don't hold by it. The Alter Rebbe answered, he said, you're right, but they'll be fulfilled in them the ruling of the Mishnah. Someone makes himself lame or blind, he pretends that he won't leave the world till he actually is lame. So you shouldn't do it. He won't die of old age, and at some point in his old age, he will have that illness, because he pretended to. He'll be that way. So the Rebbe says it's a long process, but if they keep at it, the boys, then sof kosof chip away, there'll be a real change. And this is what we're talking about. The mind of the levushim, shalavushim atzom, meshanim gamas mahus. The garment themselves change the person. The power of Peil Mamash, Machshavah Di Baramaisa. We'll conclude the Maimon tomorrow.